Mining Weekly is speaking to Kevin Eggers, the founding partner of AP Ventures, a venture capital fund that invests in early stage companies with potential to have a meaningful impact in the much needed transition to green energy. Kevin, we sit here in South Africa and we believe we have superior sun. We also believe we've got prime wind. We've got an abundance of land for solar. We have a port, Kucha, which has even called itself a renewable port. And, you know, we sort of have visions of producing renewable energy and transmitting it down to the port and using our platinum group metal endowment to help us electrolyze the seawater. And then we know that Japan is already placing orders for hydrogen. We would love to be able to be part of that. But why is hydrogen becoming a sort of logical means of storing renewable energy? And renewable energy is the energy, it seems, that people want, even though you say perhaps it's got to be more competitive. Why are they finding hydrogen such a logical means of storing renewables?
You just described in a number of sentences my vision and my passion for South Africa. I think that's where South Africa's future lies as an exporter of energy. It's got a wealth of sunshine, wind, and space, importantly. Space that Europe doesn't have, sunshine that Europe doesn't have, and that will allow South Africa to really be at the forefront of the energy export, particularly in using hydrogen. So I'm incredibly excited about that. And I think, we need a number of actors to come together, government, private enterprise, obviously the regulations change, but that's a very exciting possibility. To your question, I think hydrogen's role is really, it's so interesting because it's about the versatility that it offers. So hydrogen can be a long-term storage medium. It can be a relatively short-term storage medium. And as you probably know, we've invested in a company called Hydrogenius, which ultimately allows the storage of hydrogen in a liquid form. And what that gives you is it allows you to store it in a safe, non-combustible medium that doesn't degenerate or doesn't need any cold storage or any cryogenic storage. And that ultimately gives you flexibility. So it allows you to arbitrage the energy based on either time or distance. And that's really only thanks to the properties of hydrogen, and obviously coupled with the properties of liquid organic hydrogen specifically. But what do I mean by that? Well, where you have abundant or excess solar energy or wind energy, you can ultimately take that, convert it to hydrogen, export it to Japan as in your example, or leave it in the country and use it across some broader cycle of use, which might be in the weeks or months. And that's what hydrogen offers so compellingly different to batteries and other technology, is the flexibility and therefore that ability to arbitrage price and time, which I think is really interesting.
And could that broader use mean that hydrogen could in some way be used to supplement national electricity grids like our Eskom national grid? I mean, could there be an input from hydrogen? Is it envisaged that it's possible that the hydrogen could play a role in national electricity grids by being storable for a long time and then accessible when needed? Is that a vision at all?
And certainly that's my vision. I think it would be a fantastic buffer to the grid, particularly countries like South Africa that have struggled with reliability and capacity, and that's a real shame given the abundance of energy ultimately available in wind and sunshine. A good example is to look at what Anglo American are doing on their smart power project. I think that's obviously looking at a specific case on mine at Mogalakwena, and the ability to use the abundant or excess solar energy in their case, and convert that into hydrogen. They want to use that to run initially a single vehicle and then ultimately a fleet of vehicles. But there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't expand that concept to include broader applications of hydrogen adjacent to the mine site in the local communities, combined heat and power, there are so many options to ultimately use that abundant hydrogen, given that it's coming at a relatively low cost. The applications are really extensive. So it's a carbon-free energy source that I think acts as a wonderful supplement to a grid, and particularly to a struggling grid in South Africa. So I think South Africans should be thinking about how we can utilize hydrogen more broadly across their industrial needs, as well as more broadly into fuel cell electric vehicles, combined heat and power, taking it to the steel mills to reduce the carbon intensity of steel. It really is just almost limitless in the near-term application set. So very excited about South Africa and other countries using it as a tool to supplement their grid power.
And coming back to fuel cells themselves, how close are fuel cells from being available off the shelf? They seem to be quite complex bits of equipment there. Those stacks seem to frighten some people. How close are they for being more accessible to the market and being able to be bought off the shelf?
We've invested in some companies that have tried to take advantage of manufacturing techniques to bring fuel cells to scale. LTG is one example, based in California. There are a number of other examples. I mean, Ballard clearly is a market leader in really bringing fuel cells to the mass market. I mean, they've targeted buses as a very important application for them. But what I'm seeing increasingly is that there is availability fuel cells if you want them. I think the trick has probably been the hydrogen supply. So actually the backbone, it's almost like you can buy the razor blade, but now you need to buy the blades, and that's the issue. The hydrogen supply limitation is what's probably been the single biggest obstacle to really mass rollout of fuel cells. And I speak, for example, in places like Florida and California, where fuel cells have had reasonably high penetration, specifically from one of our companies, LTG. But the limitation there is constantly the availability of hydrogen at local centers. So we need to work at getting hydrogen distribution through depots, through different technologies like using organic carriers, and then ultimately, getting gaseous hydrogen available to sites. And certainly in some of our work in South Africa, I've seen that that's also a constraint. So the ability to find pure hydrogen across the country in an accessible fashion. So I would say, look, we can get you the fuel cells, but we do need to make sure that there's the backbone of the infrastructure there to make them reliable and actually usable. But having said that, back on the fuel cells themselves, there are a number of companies that are expanding the work around cost reduction, particularly design for manufacture, and also looking to lower cost regions for that manufacture. We're talking to a number of companies now with specific design for manufacturer capabilities, with outsourcing set up in India and China as a way to try and take advantage of some really aggressive cost down targets that they have.
And you're talking about infrastructure and the need for hydrogen infrastructure. Now, with Hydrogeneous and the way they carry that hydrogen in a liquid form, is it not possible to use existing infrastructure?
Yeah, Martin, I mean, that's exactly what attracted us to Hydrogeneous, and was a really important part of our investment thesis, was the ability to use existing infrastructure. And yeah, it does need a little bit of cleaning, but ultimately, these are not pressurized containers. It's a safer and easier to handle liquid than the hydrocarbons we presently use in our across our industry, so diesel and petroleum. So it's simpler to store, it's safer to store, and it really is a neat way to swap out a sort of higher carbon intensity product with a lower carbon intensity product. So absolutely, that's fundamental to our thesis. And I think countries like South Africa with existing infrastructure can transition relatively easily to using organic carriers as a way of distributing hydrogen and ultimately exporting hydrogen, as we discussed earlier. I think so that's really exciting, and you'll see that our thesis sort of was ultimately seen coming together quite nicely with Royal Vopak, the Dutch terminal storage company. So they store significant amounts of hydrocarbons for all the large oil and gas companies, so the Shells and BP and Totals of the world. And Royal Vopak made an investment into Hydrogenious last July, so July of 2019, with the specific intention of ultimately using some of their infrastructure to store liquid organic hydrogen carriers in a future world where they are no longer storing hydrocarbons, but storing a zero carbon fuel. And very excited to say that we're working on a big project with them at the Port of Rotterdam, where we'll be looking at installing some equipment there to test run this at larger scale. And it's very exciting to see those developments. I could see a very easy opportunity to replicate that model in South Africa, who has all of the core infrastructure ready to adopt liquid organic hydrogen carriers.
I was very happy to hear that Rotterdam had also made contact with South Africa as a potential supplier of hydrogen. But now looking more micro, the mining companies, the platinum group metal mining companies and marketing companies, we always, as a publication, Mining Weekly, try to encourage them to market their metals by using them themselves, cleaning up their own act. And it's great to see what Anglo is planning at Mogalakwena. Do you think it would help if other platinum group mining companies, because of the demand that they clean up their act, also start going in for these products that are available, and we have hydrogen fuel cells and the green economy opening up in micro fashion in mining companies?
Yeah, Martin, I think it starts, the opportunities start, bottom up. And as you say, the micro opportunities are the ones I'm most excited about. There's a really good opportunity for the rest of the South African mining houses to I think follow Anglo's lead on this topic and look to work together, look at opportunities across their mines. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that the mining houses, as you say, can clean up their act. They have, across their industrial complexes and their adjacent areas of influence, I'm thinking about all the relevant housing, large mining complexes that exist, to decarbonize those operations. And I think there's a really good opportunity to use hydrogen fuel cells in applications that can actually showcase and demonstrate global leadership here. And it's been really interesting to me that since Anglo announced their work last year, the number of inquiries and interest I've had as a company, we're obviously independent of Anglo, but it's been really interesting to see how much demand and interest that's created, that news story's created. But furthermore, it's what it does to the very nascent industry. This is an industry that needs a leg up, it needs early adopters, and those single projects act as really important lighthouse demonstrations of the capability. And what's really interesting now is there's no longer demonstration in the old sort of technology demonstration word, which sort of refers to the fact that we're demonstrating technology that hitherto has been not demonstrated. These technologies are now proven, and they're now getting adapted and can be quite effective in delivering sort of value day one. So if you look at the Anglo's model, there's some really interesting upside once they roll that out across their broader mining fleet. So these are not just decisions made on some hope and a promise with an intention to help. These are actually decisions that have economic value, as well as offering, I think, a very compelling proposition to customers who know that they are buying ultimately a cleaner product because it's mined on a lower carbon intensity mine. I think that's really interesting proposition to be not only leading the adoption of fuel cells and hydrogen and demonstrating it, but also offering a value add to your customers and society.
Could platinum group metals, and that's from a South African interest point of view, be used to also boost the likes of battery electric vehicles or BEVs?
I've long spoken about the fact that there's no need to poo-poo one technology in the desire to advance the other. I mean, it's very clear that fuel cell electric vehicle is obviously primarily a hydrogen powered vehicle, but it does have a significant battery, and those batteries working in tandem with the fuel cells what ultimately delivers the ultimate driving experience. So effectively, they're hybrid vehicles. And I think seeing the developments in batteries and the cost of battery packs in vehicles coming down has certainly been a significant enabler to advance fuel cell electric vehicles. So I see this being as one and the same. They're effectively cousins in the same broad stable. Clearly, from a South African Inc. perspective, and certainly from my perspective as AP Ventures, we would like to see fuel cell electric vehicles certainly take a large share of the demand. But I recognize it's important that both technologies gain some traction or significant traction, and ultimately to decarbonize the world we live in. We've got the Paris Agreement of 2015, which is already 5 years old, and in order to meet some of those targets, we absolutely have to see multiple technologies coming together across many different industries for us to get anywhere near our target of limiting temperatures increases to 2 degrees. And I think that's important. So from a broader societal, socioeconomic perspective, I'm supportive of both technologies. And then also at a micro level, I think any advancements we see in battery electric vehicles and battery packs specifically should help fuel cell electric vehicles gain some market traction.
I was very happy with the European Union's and the European Commission leadership, the attitude to the recovery, the post-COVID recovery being green intensive. And we see Germany's strategy adopted, beginning to roll out. We know that Japan is keen on this, and California. Are there any other countries? And do you see a sort of a thrust? Because I've got used to now, I look at the skies out every morning, and Veronica says to me, wow, look at these clear skies, because the cars aren't there. We've got used to having wonderful air. And so hopefully even COVID will push us towards decarbonization. And could you just sort of finally end up with a vision, of what the world could do about decarbonizing on a macro scale, and the role that hydrogen, fuel cells, BEVs, and everything else would play?
You've touched on a really interesting point, and I've been following this debate closely, particularly in the last, say, 4 months. As you said, it is a international health crisis, and clearly against a sort of stark and slightly depressing backdrop. But the one shining light is the countries like Germany, who have taken real leadership in saying that any recovery has to have a green element to it, and that's now become clear out of the EU and their Green Deal. And I'm very excited to see that. In Germany, particularly in some of the old coal mining areas, there's a lot of investment capital that will go into helping them transition, and they very much are thoughtful about not leaving some sectors or some regions of their economy behind. So that there's extra added incentive for them to adopt these broad policies. But with Germany's leadership, Japan, South Korea, California is always at the forefront of reducing emissions. I feel really optimistic. And I think on the back of COVID, we've got, as you say, people have got a sense of new normal. Perhaps, there's going to be lower demand in air travel. People are getting more accustomed to doing due diligence, interviews, all these things over virtual mediums. And what that may also have a benefit on the planet. So I'm really excited about what I see. I think increasingly with the lead of some countries, what we'll see is that it'll become more and more self-evident for the fast followers to adopt similar policies. And once we achieve, a meaningful amount of scale, I'm very confident that we'll be able to, reach some of our decarbonization goals. And furthermore, Martin, you just have to look at some of the large oil companies. I think they've really been shaken in the last 12 months, both with low oil prices, but also with the attention that's been put on them to decarbonize, not just their own operations, but ultimately the product that they sell to the end customer. And it's no longer acceptable just to sell a high carbon intensity fuel. So we've been in conversations with a number of the large oil and gas companies, and I'm very excited to see that they are taking this very seriously. And then also you can see in the media, earlier this week, BP announced a significant write-down of their assets. Shell had announced a similar write-down in the value of their assets. Some of that's driven by the low oil price, but some of that's driven by a recognition that the high carbon intensity economy is a thing of the past. And I remain very hopeful that we'll have clear skies for longer.
Mining Weekly has been speaking to Kevin Eggers, the founding partner of AP Ventures, a venture capital fund that invests in early stage companies with potential to have a meaningful impact on the much needed transition to green energy.